All names and details have been changed for privacy reasons. Watch the video until the end to make sure you never fall victim to scammers. My name is Ron, and I'm 75 years old. I live in a small, sun-baked town in California, where the days are quiet and the evenings are spent watching the sunset paint the sky orange. My life has been simple, 40 years working as a mechanic, raising 2 kids who've long since moved away, and now, retirement with my wife, Clara, in our modest home. We get by on my pension and Social Security, but there's never much left over for extras. That's why, when I got that phone call last spring, it felt like a miracle. $1 million, they said. $1 million that would change everything. But looking back, it wasn't a miracle. It was a trap, one that cost me $6,500 and a piece of my pride. It started on a Tuesday morning. Clara was out at her book club, and I was tinkering with an old radio in the garage when the phone rang. I wiped the grease off my hands and picked up. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, like one of those radio announcers from back in the day. "Mr. Ronald Harper?" he asked. I said yes, and he introduced himself as James Whitaker from the National Lottery Association. I'd never heard of it, but he sounded so official I didn't question it. He told me I'd won $1 million in a sweepstakes I didn't even remember entering. My heart skipped a beat. $1 million? For me? "Congratulations, Mr. Harper," he said, his voice warm and excited, like he was thrilled for me. This is life-changing news. I couldn't help but smile. I pictured paying off the mortgage, surprising Clara with a trip to Hawaii, something we'd dreamed of but never afforded. Maybe we'd even help our grandkids with college. My mind was racing, but James kept talking, explaining how the process worked. "Before we can release the funds," he said, "you'll need to cover the processing fees and taxes. It's standard procedure for large winnings." That gave me pause. Taxes? Fees? I'd never won anything bigger than a $50 raffle at the VFW, so I didn't know how these things worked. But James was ready for my hesitation. "It's just a small upfront cost," he assured me. "The IRS requires us to collect the tax before dispersing the funds. It's to protect you and ensure everything's legal." He threw around terms like federal compliance and wire transfer protocols, and I'll admit, it sounded convincing. I'm no expert in taxes or lotteries, and at my age, you trust that people in charge know what they're doing. He told me the total came to $2,500, $1, $500 for the tax, and $1,000 for processing. It was a lot, but compared to $1 million, it seemed reasonable. "Once you pay," James said, "we'll overnight your check or wire the funds directly to your account." I told him I'd need to talk to Clara first, but he urged me not to wait. "This is a time-sensitive offer, Mr. Harper. If the fees aren't paid within 48 hours, the prize could be forfeited." I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to lose this chance. I hung up and called Clara, but her phone went to voicemail. She was probably deep in a discussion about Jane Austen. I paced the kitchen, weighing my options. We had about $3,000 in savings, money we'd been setting aside for a new roof. I figured I could use most of it, and once the $1 million came through, we'd replace it and then some. I called James back and told him I'd pay. He gave me instructions to buy prepaid debit cards at the local pharmacy and call him back with the card numbers. "It's the safest way to handle these transactions," he said. I didn't question it. I was too caught up in the dream. That afternoon, I drove to the pharmacy, bought 2 $1,250 debit cards, and called James from the parking lot. My hands were shaking as I read off the numbers. He thanked me, promised I'd hear from him soon, and hung up. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't tell Clara right away. I wanted to surprise her when the check arrived. But the check didn't come. 2 days later, James called again. "There's been a slight hiccup," he said. My heart sank. He explained that the IRS had flagged the transaction because of an audit requirement for large winnings. "It's routine," he assured me, "but we need an additional $2,000 to clear it." I felt my chest tighten. Another fee? I told him I'd already paid $2,500 and he apologized, saying it was out of his control. If you don't cover this, the funds could be tied up for months, or worse, redirected to another winner. I was angry, but more than that, I was scared. I'd already invested so much, how could I walk away now? I argued with him, but he was calm, professional, always with an answer. He even offered to expedite the process if I paid right away. I didn't have $2,000 liquid, so I dipped into our emergency fund, a savings account we hadn't touched in years. I bought more debit cards, gave him the numbers, and waited. Again, nothing. By now, Clara was starting to notice something was wrong. I'd been short-tempered, distracted. She asked if I was okay, and I brushed it off, saying I was just tired. I couldn't bring myself to tell her I'd spent $4,500 on a promise that was starting to feel shaky. I kept hoping James would call with good news, but when he did, it was always the same story, another fee, another unforeseen regulation. The next time, it was $2,000 for a state tax clearance. I was out of savings, so I took a cash advance on my credit card, a decision that makes me sick to think about now. That brought the total to $6,500. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called James and demanded proof, a letter, a contract, anything. He promised to send it, but said it would take a week. That's when I started to see things clearly. I sat down at our old computer and searched for the National Lottery Association. Nothing. I typed in James Whitaker's name, the phone number he'd called from dead ends. Then I searched lottery scams, and my heart dropped. Page after page of stories just like mine. People, mostly older folks, losing thousands to fake lotteries and inheritances. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. When Clara came home, I told her everything. I braced for her to be angry, but she just hugged me, tears in her eyes. "We'll figure it out, Ron," she said. But I knew we'd lost money we couldn't afford to lose. The roof would have to wait. The credit card bill would haunt us for years. I felt like I'd failed her, failed us. We reported it to the police, but they said there was little they could do. The calls came from overseas. The money was gone, untraceable. I contacted the FTC, filed a complaint, but it felt hollow. The scammers had moved on to their next mark, and I was left picking up the pieces. Clara and I sat down and made a plan to cut back, fewer dinners out, no new clothes, maybe sell my old tools. It hurt, but we'd survive. We always had. Looking back, I see the red flags I missed. The urgency, the prepaid cards, the lack of paperwork. I was so blinded by the idea of $1 million that I didn't stop to think. I'm sharing my story because I don't want anyone else to fall for it. If you get a call saying you've won a prize but need to pay first, hang up. Real lotteries don't work that way. Talk to someone you trust before sending money. Check online, call the authorities, do anything but believe a stranger's smooth voice. I'm Ron, and I lost $6,500 to a scam. But I'm still here, still fighting. And if my story saves even one person from the same mistake, it'll be worth telling. If you watched the video until the end, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next video.